Hey y'all, welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Leighanne and I talk about books. So this is where we talk about all the stats and kind of what I learned in my reading habits going through the year. All of the previous videos will be linked down below if you want to go check those out. So let's talk some stats, shall we? Start off with number of books that I read this year. I set my goal at 75 because that seemed like, you know, a good number. And I ended up reading 157 books this year, which is the most that I have ever read in a year. And I honestly didn't think that I was going to read that many books. It just kind of happened. Like, I didn't really pay attention to the numbers, honestly. I had 0 DNFs this year because I'm a completionist. I know everybody's always like, oh, well, life's too short to read bad books, but I don't know. I feel like it's, for me personally, I feel like it's really hard for me to judge a book, you know, without finishing the whole thing. Also, sometimes I just like hate reading. It's a thing that I do. So when we break that down into pages, that is 40,480 pages, which is a lot. Average pages per book is about 258. When we talk about formatting, and I'm looking down, you're just gonna have to forgive me because I have a giant spreadsheet, which I will link that spreadsheet down below. That is very beautiful, Darren, that you want everybody to see you groom. Thank you. 106 physical books, which means those are all books that I own. So even though like I hauled a good bit of books this year, I would say reading 106 of those books is still pretty good. Ebooks, I only read 11, and that's something that I definitely need to change in the coming year because I have a lot of ebooks, and I have a Kindle and a Nook, so like why would I not? And then audiobooks, I read 40. And a lot of the physical books that I have, I did read like half print and half audio, but when I do that, I usually end up just counting the whole thing as a physical book. And a lot of the audiobooks that I have either came from my Audible library or my library itself, because I did make really good friends with my library this year. So that's a thing. So let's talk about age groups. The vast majority of what I read is adult books, and 133 of them were adult. 13 of them were young adult and 11 were middle grade, which, you know, isn't terrible. I just don't read a ton of young adult, although I have more young adult on my shelves than I thought that I did. So let's talk about some genres. So my most read genres this year, and they're actually tied, are horror with 34 books and mystery thriller also with 34 books. My least read genre was romance and literary fiction, I guess. I don't know what the literary fiction was, but I read 2 of those each. I didn't read anything from classics, didn't read any poetry. I also read a substantial amount of fantasy. I read 20 fantasy books. So 17 of the books that I read this year were rereads, and audiobook hours 429. But I listened to anywhere between 2 and 2.5 times speed, so that actually is only about 215 hours. So most of the books that I read were between 200 and 300 pages. The longest book that I read was over 1,000 pages, and I don't know what book that was, honestly. I really can't remember. Maybe Hero of Ages? No, that was only like 700 and something. I don't know. I can't remember. And then I read 2 books that were less than 100 pages. Publication years, I am shocked to say that I actually read 27 books that were released in 2018, which is more than I usually do. I usually focus on backlist titles, which is actually something that I did. I read 2 books that were published before the 1920s, 9 books from the 50s, 9 books from the 70s, 7 from the 80s, 4 from the 90s, 17 from the 2000s, 77 from 2010 to 2017. Breakdown of author gender: 84 male authors, 72 female authors, 1 anthology series, which was both, and then 0 non-binary. So that's roughly 54% male authors, which is less of a disparity than last year because last year I overwhelmingly read male authors. I'm happy that I did read more women this year. About 27% of what I read this year would have been considered diverse, with like diverse main characters that aren't written by white people. It may just be like the author is from a different country or from a different race as myself, whether that's like dealing with mental illness, you know, or a disability disability, some kind of combination, things like that. So last year I only read about 19% of my books would have been considered diverse in some way, and so to go from 19% to almost 30%, it's not as high as I would have wanted it to be, but I'm going in the right direction, so I'm gonna call that a win. The best month that I had in terms of book count was definitely December, where I read 21 books. Now that sounds really impressive, but when you look at what I read, it was a lot of middle grade that month. I think I read like 9 middle grade books. So, you know, when you look at the lengths of those, not really that impressive, because you know you can read those really quickly. And then my worst month was actually March. I only read 7 books in the month of March. When you look at page disparity, again, best month being in December with 5,667 pages, and then the worst month was actually April with 1,475. No, I lied. September with 1,384. So my assumption is a lot of those months were audio, very audio heavy. So I had 142 novels, 5 novellas, 6 anthologies. And I think anthology, and this is something that I would change in the next spreadsheet, when it says anthology, that also counts as like a short story collection. Not necessarily an anthology with different authors, but you know, one author short story collections. And then 4 graphic novels. And then whenever we want to talk about star breakdown, my average star rating was 3.63. I gave out 29 5 stars, 58 4 stars, 55 3 stars, 13 2 stars, and 2 1 stars. So still not like a ton of 1 and 2 stars. So those are the statistics for the year. So now let's talk about really what I learned, right? I learned just what a mood reader I can be. Like, I've always known that I was a mood reader, but I really learned something about myself, is that I get in the mood for like one genre and then I like read a bunch of that genre, and I don't want to say burn myself out on it, but like my mind goes in like a very logical way. Like, I'll read true crime and then I have to read like a thriller, and then I'll read like a horror, and then it goes to fantasy, which then goes to contemporary or something like that. There's always like a thought process behind why I pick what I pick. But I'm 100% a mood reader. Like, TBRs will never work for me, ever. And that's one of the reasons that I find it so hard to do readathons. But I did do 3 readathons this year. I did Contemporary-a-thon. I did Contemporary-a-thon twice. So technically 4, but 2 rounds of 1. And then I did Tome Infinity and Beyond, which was science fiction. And then I did Books in the Freezer, which was horror. Speaking of horror, I definitely learned about myself this year that I really love the horror genre as a whole. And going into 2019, that is a genre that you are going to see a ton more of that on this channel. I also learned that I have a lot more fantasy on my shelves than I thought that I did. And I always say that, oh, I don't read a lot of contemporary, and that's not true. I just figured out that I prefer more in-depth contemporaries. I really enjoy contemporaries with a deeper subject matter. I enjoy diverse historical fiction as well. I have a whole shelf of that, and I did read a little bit from that shelf this year and really loved the things that I picked up, and so I definitely want to make it a point to read more than that. I discovered that I've always really liked kind of like fairy tale-ish retellings, but I love the darker versions of those. So like Angela Carter and some of Neil Gaiman, and I read John Connolly's Book of Lost Things this year and really, really learned like that my love for that runs deep. I really love fairy tale retellings if they're on the darker side. I learned that when I first started BookTube that I gave into the hype a lot more than I should have. You know, I bought things to put on my shelves that I didn't really have that much of an interest in, and over the last year I've really gone through and pulled those things out and gotten rid of them because I have limited space and I really want to surround myself with books that I love and books that I'm interested in reading. I've become much more wary of like the BookTube hype, so to speak. That's not to say that the books that generally fall into that category are bad books by any means. Just I've been burned a couple too many times. I think as my tastes have morphed and I've really learned what I love and what I don't love, I definitely won't be like falling into that hype very much. So another thing that happened this year is I did get to attend BookNet Fest this year, and it was probably one of the best experiences that I have ever had. I left that event having an entirely new bookish family that I absolutely love so much. I think that having that experience made me feel closer to the community, you know, and one of the other things that it's helped me to do is really like find my balance. And I'm really looking forward to 2019 for BookNet Fest. So that's also a thing. But overall, it was a really good year in reading. It was a really good year on BookTube. And I'm really looking forward to 2019 and what those goals are going to look like, which are going to be in another video. In case you don't want to stick around for that. So this was the video of stats. The next video will be goals and things like that. So alright, so that is all I have for you guys today. What did your year in reading look like? If you have made a 2018 in review, leave a link down below so that I can watch it, you know, or you can just leave a comment and tell me how your year went. All of my social media links can also be found in the down bar below. As always, if you like what you see and you want to see more, you can click thumbs up or hit subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.